Let's now turn to the fantasy playoffs. We're in week 14, which means that in many leagues, week 15, next week is the start of the playoffs. And if not, then week 16. We created a fantasy football playoffs guide. This is something that you've been doing for many, many years, and you were generous enough to let me co-author this one with you. We looked at weeks 15, 16, 17. We looked at schedule analysis. We looked at individual positions. Let's start with a couple game environments that are of interest. So week 16, the fantasy football semifinals, we've got the Bears and the Cardinals. And what I think is interesting here is that the Cardinals, just in general, are kind of a great matchup for fantasy points. The sixth best matchup for quarterbacks, the second best for running backs when you adjust for schedule. The Bears have also just shown that they can put up points in any game that Justin Fields starts. We have the flip side. Kyler Murray's playing for his career. Cardinals are currently projecting for a pretty high pick. Whether he plays in Arizona next year or somewhere else, these final few weeks of the season are very, very important for him. To this point, he's been pretty good for fantasy, but not necessarily very good for real life NFL action. There might be some weather in Chicago too in this game. Ryan, what else do you want to add here?
Yeah, I mean, we've had so many quarterback injuries this year. These are, I'd say, 2 of the top 10 most stable guys you can just plug and play regardless of matchup. The upside's pretty considerable here. Big spot for DJ Moore, potentially. Big spot for James Conner, potentially. And on the other side, maybe Hollywood Brown goes off here. A lot of potential here. And like you said, both teams are going to be motivated. And the one caveat here, and this is why I want to talk about this game specifically, is in October, I don't really care about weather. It is what it is. But in December, you have to factor in that a game in Buffalo, a game in Chicago, especially when it's in the middle of December, late December, you have to weigh in some downside there. So Kyler Murray and a 10-degree game with 25-mile-an-hour winds, that changes the whole dynamic if that's the environment. But still, the upside's here, so we have to pay attention to this contest.
Week 17, we have 2 juggernauts. The Ravens host the Dolphins. I remember early 2022 when our head of DFS, Jordan Vanek, made a lot of money with a nice little Tua Tagovailoa stack. Miami, in a barn burner, beat the Ravens 42-38. Tua had 469 passing yards, 6 passing touchdowns. This year's a little bit of a different story. The Ravens defense has been a top 5 unit this year. Miami struggled against talented defenses. And then even Miami's defense is surging. Jalen Ramsey returned at corner, and since then, they've been a top 10 unit. There might be some weather in Baltimore. What else should the listeners need to know about this game, Ryan?
I'm glad you mentioned Jordan because we just started to get to know each other at this point, and this was the moment where I was like, I love this guy because I too was on the Dolphins offense, but he went a week earlier with it than I did. I'll remember that forever because again, talk about a 500-foot home run, Josh Jordan. This year, no one's been less impressed with the Ravens offense than me. I watch every snap of every game. Lamar Jackson's a great player, but his season's closer to Daniel Jones' 2022 campaign than everyone wants to talk about to this point. Maybe he goes crazy down the stretch, but like you said, this game has the shootout potential. We saw it last year, but we're talking about 2 good defenses here. These teams are going to be playing for maybe the number 1 seed in the AFC at this point. So I call these variable games. Sure, it can go over 60 points, but if the final here was 24-20, wouldn't even mildly surprise me.
Now let's talk about a few quarterback schedules. Let's talk about 2 of the premium options with interesting weeks 15 through 17. Let's start with Patrick Mahomes. Massive fantasy disappointment this year. We're probably still starting him. I want to know how queasy I should be about some of these because week 15 at New England in Foxborough. Week 16, home game against the Raiders. And then week 17, we were robbed. Joe Burrow's season has ended. It will be Patrick Mahomes hosting Jake Browning's Bengals.
What I find interesting about this is these are 3 games against offenses that probably aren't going to do very much against the Chiefs defense. So Kansas City could absolutely run away with time of possession in these contests. And they also probably want to get this offense going later in the season. So obviously Mahomes' supporting cast is not what it's been. They've struggled because of that. It's not a him problem, but there is massive spike week potential in all of these games. So if Mahomes had 3 of his, say, 5 best outputs of the year through this stretch, wouldn't surprise me at all.
CJ Stroud, the rookie, he's leading the NFL in passing yards per game. He's on pace for over 5,000 passing yards and over 28 passing touchdowns. Those are great numbers for anyone, especially a rookie, especially one who heading into this year, we were very concerned about the supporting cast. I think we and pretty much everyone else on the planet got this wrong. Nobody saw him leading the NFL in passing yards through 13 weeks. Will he carry that momentum forward? Weeks 15 through 17, he faces the Titans twice in weeks 15 and 17. Week 16 is a little scarier against Cleveland. How would you ideally handle him for the Stroud fantasy managers?
I'm going to say two things about this. One, I'm playing him against the Titans in both spots in a variety of scenarios. For instance, I have a team with Justin Herbert and CJ Stroud. I'm actually going to play Stroud over Herbert in both of those spots. That's my intention right now. But I am going to try to avoid that Week 16 game against the Browns. I think this season's been more about Stroud than a supporting cast. I think he's a talent elevator. Was not expecting anywhere close to what he's done this year, but I'm going to try to stay away from that one. And the other thing I'll say here, Josh, is that Week 17 home matchup in a dome against the Titans. I mean, if I'm in my fantasy championship with like considerable money on the line, and that's what I'm seeing on the other side, I'm actually genuinely concerned. I think Stroud could put up 35 points in that game.
I think so too. Guys, that's Ryan Reynolds, NFL on Twitter. All right, Ryan, right back at you. I don't have a premium quarterback. I don't know what to do in my league. Give me who's your favorite streamer for the fantasy playoffs?
I like Matthew Stafford because he has two really good spots. Week 15, he gets the Commanders defense. Like you caught this last year with the Vikings. I think the Commanders are the Vikings of 2023. You just play whoever you can against them. And with Stafford could hang 400 yards and multiple scores against them. I love that. Then week 17 against the Giants. I'm a little bit concerned that the Giants offense can't push them at all at this point, but they're going to blitz Stafford, and Stafford is the sort of quarterback that could shred them. They're going to be in the playoff hunt, so they're going to be very motivated. I think, again, I have him on another team with Herbert. I'm going to start Stafford in week 15. I think the Chargers play the Broncos in week 17. That's going to be a real decision for me.
Let's turn to running backs, Ryan.
I looked. You had a section in there about it was basically premium wide receivers and tight ends that have good schedule runs and bad schedule runs. First up, I'm going to ask you about two guys here, Josh. The first one's Josh Jacobs.
So Josh Jacobs, weeks 15 and 16, he gets the Chargers, he gets the Chiefs. Divisional matchups, we've seen Jacobs excel against both these teams. Chargers in general, that's just been a defense to target for basically every fantasy position this year. And then Kansas City's defense has been a run funnel defense. They're allowing the fourth fewest yards per pass attempt this year, yet the second highest yards per carry to running backs to opposing offenses. And then week 17 feels like a smash spot. A Colts team that ranks as the fourth best overall matchup for fantasy running backs. These teams are playing for pretty much nothing other than bragging rights, most likely. I think this could, I get kind of shades of that Colts Titans shootout from last week for this game. Josh Jacobs is not under contract next year. He's going to want to prove himself. And again, he's not under contract. The Raiders have no incentive to preserve him. I think Jacobs is getting probably close to 75 touches over those 3 weeks in the fantasy playoffs.
I like that. I know in that matchup with the Colts in week 17, I was out on Jacobs for the most part, but I did stack him with Michael Pittman and best ball on purpose for this matchup. Next one, Josh, Jalen Waddle. This is one, I'm going to frame this like this. Every year there's a few guys that had really disappointing years, and then for whatever reason, I'm a regression guy. They absolutely smash weeks 15 through 16, 17, carry you through the playoffs. You don't think Jalen Waddle's one of those guys. Tell us your concerns about him.
Yeah, it's unfortunate. I really want to like Jalen Waddle. I love him this week against the Titans. I think he's a smash start. We debuted our start sit column for week 14 this week. We talked about why Jalen Waddle is a smash start against the Titans. But unfortunately, weeks 15 through 17 are bad news. Week 15, the Jets. You adjust for schedule. It is the worst matchup for fantasy receivers. Then the Cowboys in week 16, the 12th worst matchup for fantasy receivers. And then in week 17, the Ravens in what could potentially be a bad weather game. This is also just in general, the Ravens are the third worst matchup for fantasy wide receivers. Tyreek Hill is the best wide receiver in NFL history at this point. I don't think I'm willing to hear anything else after what we've seen this year. First guy that's on pace for over 2,000 yards. He is completely matchup proof. He's a difference maker. We talked pre-show about how he has an incredible case actually for MVP. The same can't be said about Jalen Waddle. He's 21st in the NFL with 67 receiving yards per game on an explosive offense. It has been the Tyreek Hill show. And in these terrifying matchups, I'm going to be concerned about the number 2 option in that pass game.
Yeah, that's all very fair, Josh. And I have Jalen Waddle in a very good position where I could win several $1,000s if he helps me get there. And that ruined my day a little bit, Josh. Next up, you did a section on flexes that I was really looking forward to. Josh and I collabing on a lot of pieces, and one of us usually thinks up the idea, and then we ask the other one to do certain sections, but we just let them rip. We let them handle it completely on their own. So, and for week 15's flex, Josh has a number of options that you can check in our guide, but he put Tyler Algier against the Panthers, and this is exactly the kind of guy I was looking for. This is exactly the kind of guy I wanted him to write about, because this guy doesn't normally make your starting lineups, but he's in an Josh is going to tell us why he wants him, but this is the fringe play, Josh, where if you want upside, you like Algier. Tell us why.
Yeah, I'm glad you chose the absolute stinkiest out of all the week 15 options I gave the good people. So first off, teams run at an incredibly high rate and with a lot of success against the Carolina Panthers. Then we look at the Falcons, and this is the run heaviest team in the NFL. Tyler Algier's floor has been 8 carries. He's had at least 8 carries each of the past 8 games. That's pretty good for someone that we can just think of as like a quote unquote backup running back. I think he's probably going to flirt with 10 to 15 carries in this one. They're going to be efficient. Panthers have allowed an NFL high 1.7 rushing touchdowns per game this year. No other defense is even close. And I also think this could be a blowout. I don't know what the Panthers are competing for right now. They just fired their head coach. Bryce Young is clearly overmatched with that offensive line and supporting cast. Falcons sneakily fighting for not just a playoff spot, but to just win the division. And I think this could be a blowout where Bijan Robinson gets there in fantasy, puts up 2-3 touchdowns, and then they hand it to Algier in the fourth quarter, and he runs in a score or two himself. So I think there's sneaky 15 to 20 fantasy point upside from a player that you really just haven't started all year.
Exactly, Josh. Exactly. In this particular matchup, if he has 80 yards rushing on 14 carries with a touchdown or two, like that's very much on the table. And that could be the difference in your matchup. I absolutely love that one. For week 16, the guy that I picked out here, Josh, Gabe Davis against the Chargers. Tell us about the ceiling for Davis in this matchup.
So first off, Chargers have allowed an NFL high 290 passing yards per game to opponents. The Bills have been disappointing this year. It's mostly just been weird turnover variance. When you look at pretty much any metric like yards per attempt, passing yards per game, EPA per play, this is a top 5 NFL offense still. Gabe Davis can always score 20 fantasy points in a week. In fact, he's actually done it 4 times this year. He's been under 10 fantasy points in 6 games. So what we could say is that he's a very boom or bust option. I think the arrow is kind of pointing up towards the boom, given that the Bills should be kind of grasping for a wild card, that it's just a good matchup in general, and that Gabe Davis has generally excelled against some of these softer defenses.
That's something I love about this, Josh. If the Bills are going to crawl back into the AFC playoff picture, Josh Allen's going to have to go scorched earth. And against this Chargers team, we've seen Gabe Davis stack like a 40-point fantasy game again. And I don't want to say that's what he's going to do here, but that's not outside the realm of possibility in that matchup. Week 17, Josh, kind of a less interesting play, but on the other hand, probably quite a bit more controversial. I picked out Jonathan Mingo against the Jaguars. Tell us about that one.
Yeah, sometimes I like players that everyone hates, and I think this is a good case of that. Mingo's quietly led the Panthers in targets each of the past 2 weeks. Last week, he had 10 targets. That was nearly a 40% target share. He caught 6 for 69 yards. That's not too exciting. That's only 13 fantasy points. But hey, if he scored a touchdown, suddenly you're nearly at 20. The second round rookie might keep heating up. Week 17, we've got that pass funnel Jaguars defense that we talked about earlier. It's a game where Trevor Lawrence will definitely be back and fully healthy from his high ankle sprain. I think Carolina is going to be trailing pretty much this entire game. They're going to have to pass a lot. And we've just kind of seen a changing of the guard where over the past few weeks, Thielen trending down, Mingo trending up. Would not be particularly surprising if Mingo gives you another 6 for 69 and this time gets in the box and suddenly you think Mingo for 19 fantasy points. All right, defense time. Whew. Ryan, this is your bread and butter right here. Before we talk about a few of these defense options concretely, discuss the process a little bit for anyone that's newer to the way that you talk about and think about fantasy defenses.
I like defense more than offense. I'm a defense kind of guy, so I pay attention to it more. In fantasy, what I'm looking for is I'm ideally looking for a trench advantage from the defense. Trying to think of one off the top of my head. Like, for instance, this week the Packers play the Giants. Their pass rush has a trench advantage that elevates their ability to blow the doors off New York and dominate that game. I'm interested in that. Then ideally, I want vulnerable quarterbacks that are going to lose. if a volatile quarterback, like say, for instance tonight, Patriots Steelers, I think that's probably going to be a very muddy game in most scenarios, or neither offense really pulls away with this one. So both teams are going to be super conservative for as long as they can in that one for the most part. Where if, say, the Dolphins play the Titans, that's a game where I could see Will Levis throwing 3 interceptions in a negative game script. So I'm more interested in a game like that in fantasy. And then sometimes, Eagles, Cowboys, maybe there's turnovers and sacks and defensive touchdowns in there, but I trend to look for games the defense can actually dominate their opponent.
Let's talk about a few premium options now. A lot of people out there have just been riding one defense all year. They picked one up in the 10th, 11th round of their fantasy draft, and they are just riding them into the sunset. Some of them don't have great schedules. Tell me a few that do have great schedules where we get not just the premium defense, but some very tantalizing opponents as well.
Yeah, we talked about Patrick Mahomes' schedule before: Patriots, Bengals, and Raiders. If Buffalo beats the Chiefs this week and people start dropping the Chiefs defense, I'm jumping on them. If you need someone, I know in a league I have Dallas, who's a top scoring defense this year. If someone drops the Chiefs, I'm going to pick them up and play them each week. That's my favorite one. There's a few others, like the Ravens have kind of a dicey playoff schedule that I just mentioned. Dallas is a dicey playoff schedule. The 49ers play Washington in week 17. That's the matchup you don't want to face. The Eagles get the Giants in week 16, the Cardinals in week 17, two games where they could blow the absolute doors off their team. The Browns get the Jets in week 17 at home on a Thursday night. That's a game where they can conceivably shut them out. And to go with that too, the Jets defense, they get the Commanders in week 16 and they get the Browns themselves. So I think those are the schedules that I like the most for defenses.
Give me an under the radar defense that some people should be scooping up right now.
Houston plays the Jets this week, so I know in a couple of my leagues they already got taken, but we just talked about it. They get Will Levis in week 15. They get Will Levis in week 17, and then they get Joe Flacco in week 16 at home. The Browns aren't a dominant defense, but they're a good one. They've been the difference in a number of their victories this year. They're the most middle of the road defense that I want for the fantasy playoffs.
You and I actually operate a little differently. Usually you're more of a premium defense guy. I'm a little bit more of a streamer. Give me a streamer defense that you really like for these playoffs.
Well, first, before I give you that, I want to point this out. The Bills are playing the Chiefs this week. If anyone drops them over the next couple of weeks, because I think they play Dallas soon too. So if anyone drops them, they get New England in week 17. You don't want to be on the other side of someone starting the Bills against the Patriots defense in week 17. So just at least block them if they come available. Otherwise, I think the Seahawks are the team I want. Seattle they get the Titans in week 16. They get the Steelers in week 17. They're going to be desperate. They're probably going to be 6-8 because they play the 49ers this week, the Eagles next week. They're probably going to have to win out to make the playoffs. Those are two volatile quarterbacks. With the Steelers' offensive line's better. The Titans' offensive line's below average. So that's the matchup I really love, but they're very playable in both of those outings.
Yeah, I was going to say that Seahawks-Cowboys game. Crazy high scoring, no punts, but Dak took quite a few sacks in that one. I was actually quite impressed with the Seahawks pass rush.
Yeah, I was surprised by that. Kind of less surprised by Geno Smith having a spike game because they needed it, but I was not expecting Seattle's pass rush to make a difference on the road. Josh, let's close this out. Let's close this out with a big one here, pal. If it's not Christian McCaffrey, which running back has the most fantasy points per game through the fantasy playoff?
All right. I'm looking at week 10. This running back had 24 combined carries and targets. He was on bye in week 11. Week 12, 22 combined carries and targets. Week 13, 23 combined carries and targets. This sounds like a bell cow to me. His fantasy playoff schedule, week 15, he has the third best fantasy matchup. It's against Carolina. Week 16, he has the fourth best fantasy matchup. It's the Colts. Coincidentally, week 17, we now hit the fifth best fantasy matchup against the Bears. If it's not Christian McCaffrey, it's going to be Bijan Robinson.
Catch more of the conversation only on the 33rd Team Fantasy and Betting Network, wherever you get your podcasts.